The room smelled like wealth. That was the first thing I noticed when I stepped into the Grant family's penthouse dining room, a cocktail of imported wood polish, vintage wine, and entitlement. The table was long, polished mahogany, stretching wider than some apartments. The chandelier above flickered like it was trying to compete with the attention in the room. Everything and everyone was perfectly arranged. 12 seats. 11 of them filled with people who wore tailored suits, practiced smiles, and generational arrogance. And me, the 12th. The outsider. I took my seat quietly, like I always did. Smiled politely at the woman beside me, my wife, Clara. She looked stunning, as always. Ivory satin dress, diamond earrings that caught every ounce of light, and a look on her face like the world owed her a thank you. She didn't look at me. Her brother Mason sat at the far end, already halfway through his second glass of wine. He had the kind of confidence that only came from never being told no. Across from him, their mother Lorraine dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, eyes cold and calculating. And at the head of the table sat Charles Grant, the man who once shook my hand like he was greeting a charity case. He raised his glass toward me. "To family," he said. "To family," everyone repeated. I nodded, said nothing, and reached for my water. The dinner started the way it always did, fake interest, polite insults disguised as compliments. Mason asked me if I was still trying the computer thing. Lorraine asked if I'd found a job that pays in something other than hope. Clara didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Then came the appetizers. Foie gras, quail egg, something with truffle I couldn't pronounce. I cut small pieces, chewed slowly, and waited. I already knew this wasn't just a dinner. You learn things when you live quiet. You hear what people think you miss. Charles tapped his glass. "Before we move on, we've prepared a little something. A family tradition, just some light fun." He winked at me like I was supposed to laugh. A hum began. Hidden speakers. Then the lights dimmed. Behind me, the screen lowered. Massive. Bright. Professionally edited. And then it flashed. Failed son-in-law. Unemployed. Disappointment. Deadbeat. Reject. Laughter erupted. Mason howled. "Careful," he said between gasps. He might cry. Clara didn't even try to hide her smirk. She raised her glass and took a slow sip, like the moment was a toast to her upgraded life. Her eyes met mine for half a second. Empty. Lorraine turned to me, her smile rehearsed. "Just a joke, darling." Charles chuckled, that deep, booming laugh of a man who'd never had to ask permission. "It's all in good fun, son. You know we love having you around." I looked at the screen again. The words were bold, clean. Someone had spent real money on this. Maybe even planned it weeks in advance. That much effort, just to humiliate me. Interesting. I glanced down at my plate, then slowly placed my napkin on the table. I stood up. Calmly. No shouting. No drama. "Joke's over," I said. They paused, unsure. Some still chuckled, thinking I'd play along. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, unlocked it, tapped a folder labeled Evening. My thumb hovered for a moment. Then I looked up and said one word. Play. The laughter died instantly. The screen flickered. The slideshow stopped. A new video loaded. The room fell quiet as a black background appeared with white text. "Welcome to the real Grant family." Charles blinked. "What's this?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The video began. Footage played of Mason at a rooftop bar, clearly drunk, bragging about something to a group of investors. His voice was slurred, but the words were clear enough. "I don't care if it's illegal. The inside scoop's coming from the zoning office. They'll approve the land switch." Charles promised it. "It's guaranteed. We dumped the stocks next quarter, clean house." Gasps echoed across the table. Lorraine's fork dropped onto her plate. Charles stood up. "Turn that off." I raised one hand, gesturing slightly. "You can try." He stepped toward the wall control panel. Nothing responded. I'd disabled it hours earlier. The video cut to another scene. Clara, a recording from a spa room. Her voice filled the room. Casual, dismissive, cruel. "He's sweet, but honestly, he's just convenient. Keeps my taxes clean. Lets me focus on the important stuff." Laughter. Hers. And her friends. "Honestly, sometimes I forget he's even there. He blends into the furniture." Silence followed. I stood unmoving, still calm. I looked at her. Clara's eyes were wide now. Pale. Her hand trembled slightly. She reached for her glass again, then set it back down. Charles was red. Furious. "You're finished, you understand? This is treason." I smiled faintly. "No, Charles. This is accountability." The video kept playing. The screen now showed tax records, emails, phone logs, all of them real, all of them tied to every backdoor deal, every whispered threat, every buried complaint. Lorraine's voice echoed from a hidden recording. Divert the donation. Move it through the education wing. Nobody checks those books. I watched them all. No gloating. No yelling. They had made a show out of my supposed failure. Tonight, I gave them truth in return. The screen went black again. To be continued. In court. The projector shut down. The lights came back on. No one laughed. I looked around the table. Then at Clara. You once told me I wasn't built for the spotlight, I said softly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. Turns out, I said, I just wanted to make sure the spotlight was worth stepping into. I turned, walked away from the table. Behind me, only silence. They called me lucky. That was always the word they used. You're lucky Clara picked you. Lucky Charles lets you into his circles. Lucky to be part of this family. Every time someone said it, they thought they were complimenting me. But what they were really doing, what they always did, was remind me of my place. The outsider. The man who married up. The man who should be grateful. But let me tell you something, I wasn't lucky. I was observant. I kept my mouth shut not because I was weak, but because I was watching. I learned early on that in rooms like theirs, silence was more powerful than noise. If you speak too quickly, they laugh. If you stay quiet too long, they get uncomfortable. And discomfort? That's where the cracks begin to show. I met Clara when I was 27. She was polished, charming, and had the kind of smile that made you think she'd never tasted failure. I was already a few years into developing a platform, one that could aggregate and track complex financial behaviors in real time. A system I built mostly at night, using data patterns from public records, offshore leak databases, and proxy shell corporations. It wasn't flashy, but it was smart, useful, dangerous in the right hands. Clara didn't understand it. Not fully, but she understood potential. She liked that I had ambition, that I didn't crave the spotlight. That's rare in a man, she said one night, lying on my chest. You're quietly powerful. I believed her. She introduced me to her family a few months later, and that was when I realized how the Grants operated. Smiles like shark teeth. Compliments wrapped in threats. They tested people the way you test a dog to see how much it'll take before it bites. The first test came early. Charles invited me to a fundraiser. Said it was casual. I showed up in a blazer and tie. Everyone else wore tuxedos. I was laughed at before dessert. Oh, he's modest, Lorraine had said, fanning herself. It's endearing. A little, humble background flair. I smiled. I always smiled. But something shifted inside me that night. I realized I wasn't supposed to fit in. I was supposed to stay grateful, small, forgettable. And for a while, I played along. I worked during the day, met with clients in secret, wrote code until my eyes burned. At night, I let Clara complain about her mother's expectations, about how hard it was to be the face of a legacy. I listened, held her hand. I never interrupted. She didn't know I had already secured seed funding from an overseas firm. Didn't know I had signed an NDA with a military contractor who wanted access to my algorithm. Didn't know I was licensing my tech to a foreign financial regulator who wanted to track dark money across borders. And why would she? She never asked. The more time passed, the more Clara began to treat me like furniture. Present but background. She'd go to social events without telling me, saying things like, "It's just business, you wouldn't enjoy it." When I offered to come anyway, she'd tilt her head and say, "You don't have to prove anything. Just relax, love." But what she meant was, you don't belong in those rooms. One night, I overheard her on the phone with Mason. She didn't know I was in the study, headphones off, working late. Her voice drifted from the hallway. "I don't care if he's quiet," she said. "He's boring. He's not even in the same league. But he's useful, okay? Taxes. Appearances. Dad likes that he's harmless." I didn't flinch. I took a breath. Then I clicked save on a hidden folder titled Observations. After that, I started cataloging everything. Not just conversations. Patterns. Clara had no idea how often she repeated herself when she lied. Her mother, too. Mason was careless. He recycled the same passcodes for years. Charles had a burner phone that he kept in his office drawer, third from the top. I never touched it. Just mirrored the data. I didn't need revenge then. I just needed clarity. Years passed. My company grew. Quietly. My name was buried beneath shell entities and holding companies. I had partners who spoke for me, lawyers who fronted deals. My goal wasn't fame. It was insulation. Clara never asked why I stopped checking her calendar, why I didn't care when she skipped anniversaries. She thought I was finally settling into the role they gave me, the obedient houseplant. But I wasn't wilting. I was rooting. There was a moment, about 2 years ago, that confirmed everything. It was Clara's birthday. We were at her parents' beach house. Everyone was drunk, tanned, and dripping with money. Lorraine pulled out a gift, a photo album. Inside were pictures of Clara's childhood, family vacations, debutante balls. When she reached the back, there was a photo of Clara and me on our wedding day. Only my face had been scribbled out with red ink. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That was my last performance. That night, I walked down to the shore alone and stared at the water. I remember thinking, not about leaving, but about exposing them. I didn't want to fight. I wanted a mirror. I wanted them to see themselves the way I saw them. So I got to work. I called Turner, my old roommate from MIT. He worked cybersecurity now, contracting with 3-letter agencies. We met for drinks, and I laid it out. He didn't even blink. About time, he said. Let's burn their world clean. It took months to gather everything. I didn't just want to catch them saying cruel things. I wanted the kind of evidence that held weight. Legal weight. Ethical violations. Financial misconduct. Recordings. Transfers. Manipulations of charitable donations. Insider trades. Land swaps with forged signatures. Everything they mocked me for, it was projection. And Clara? She was the worst of them all. Not because she lied, but because she believed her own story. That's what made me smile at dinner. When they played that slideshow. When the words failed son-in-law lit up in bold white letters. Because in that moment, I realized they had no idea what I had become. They still saw the man in the corner. But that man didn't exist anymore. What sat at the table that night was something they'd created without realizing. Their cruelty, their jokes, their snide looks, they gave me a purpose sharper than any ambition. And the best part? They handed me the stage. I just chose the script. You know what people never say out loud? That money is theater. That the wealthy don't just live, they perform. And no one played the roles better than the Grants. To outsiders, they were American royalty. Charles Grant, the iron-willed real estate magnate who built his fortune on strategic vision and underpaid labor. Lorraine Grant, former pageant queen turned philanthropic powerhouse, who knew how to write a check with one hand while stabbing a rival with the other. Mason, the golden boy, spoiled into oblivion, handed titles and power like birthday balloons. And then there was Clara, their glittering daughter, Harvard-educated, featured in magazines as one of Boston's most eligible women. Picture perfect. Poised. Polished. They were the kind of family that donated to causes just in time for tax season, the type who smiled for press cameras while quietly pulling permits that crushed affordable housing projects. You wouldn't know it by looking at them. That was the point. I was the blemish on their portrait. The accidental brushstroke they tried to paint over. Charles never hid it. He always greeted me with the same forced smile, lips tight, hand firm, as never fully looking at mine. He called me pal, champ, son, in the way someone calls a waiter boss. Every interaction was rehearsed, clipped, calculated. Like he was ticking a social box by acknowledging my existence. Lorraine was more subtle. She'd compliment my tie, then mention how refreshing it was that Clara didn't marry someone in her own circle, like ambition skipped a generation. She'd introduce me at events with qualifiers. This is my son-in-law. He's very sweet. Sweet. Not brilliant. Not successful. Sweet. Like a well-behaved pet. And Mason? Mason was just cruel. If Charles was the king and Lorraine the queen, Mason was the court jester with a trust fund. He drank too much, flirted with everything that moved, and never missed a chance to throw a jab. Hey, computer guy, he'd call me, even after I bought him a signed Macallan bottle for his birthday. Fix my Wi-Fi, will you? Everyone laughed. I smiled. Every time. Clara, of course, said nothing. Sometimes, she'd reach for my hand when it got too obvious, but only gently, like pacifying a child about to cry. She was always caught between two roles, the supportive wife and the loyal daughter. And every time, the latter one. But I never forgot Christmas 3 years ago. They had hosted the annual family gala, a lavish affair that doubled as a media frenzy. Ice sculptures, orchestras, imported cuisine. Clara wore a backless silver gown and smiled like her life had been scripted by royalty. I stayed near the bar, where I always did, shaking hands with people who assumed I was one of the caterers. Just before dessert, Lorraine handed out personalized gifts, a new tradition. Mason got a vintage Rolex. Charles received a bust of himself sculpted by an Italian artist. Clara opened hers, a diamond bracelet. Then Lorraine turned to me with a smile. "We didn't forget you, sweetheart," she said. She handed me a box, black, velvet, too large for jewelry. I opened it slowly. Inside was a framed photo of Clara. Just her. On our wedding day. The caption engraved beneath it read, "She could have done better." Everyone laughed. Even Clara chuckled nervously. "Mom." I forced a smile. My fingers tightened on the frame. I looked straight at Lorraine. "That's funny," I said. "Isn't it?" She replied, sipping her wine. Later that night, I sat alone on the balcony, cold wind on my face, the frame lying next to my Scotch glass. That was the night something broke in me. Not because they embarrassed me. That had happened too often to matter. No, what broke was the idea that they would ever stop. I could have built a skyscraper, and they'd still call me the guy who married up. I could have cured cancer, and they'd still say I fixed Wi-Fi for a living. They didn't just want to humiliate me. They wanted to define me. And I couldn't let that happen anymore. So I started collecting. Every birthday toast I wasn't included in. Logged. Every email Clara forgot to delete from her laptop. Copied. Every backhanded comment. Every hint of scandal. Every shadowy deal Mason bragged about during drunken dinners. I wrote it all down. I became an archivist of their arrogance. At first, it felt petty, vindictive, but then I saw the patterns. The bribery hidden under donations. The foundation money rerouted to offshore accounts. The internships Mason handed out to women he later ghosted. Clara's backdoor dealings with her father's legal team, making sure our prenup had contingencies that favored her in case I ever made real money. That's when I realized it wasn't just about jokes anymore. They were dangerous. And I had married into something I didn't even recognize. You see, people like the Grants believe they're untouchable. Because for so long, they've been right. They throw parties with senators, play tennis with judges, donate to both sides of a political campaign, so no matter who wins, they get invited to the victory dinner. They don't fear consequence, because they've never seen one stick. Until now. I didn't want to destroy them out of bitterness. That's not the story I'm telling you. I wanted to end the cycle. Burn down the illusion they had built around themselves. Because for all their gold and glass, the Grants were fragile. One good crack, and the whole facade would splinter. That's why I kept smiling through every insult. Why I didn't flinch when they played that slideshow at the dinner. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew the curtain was about to fall. They thought they were performing. But I was the one writing the final act. And the audience? Oh, I made sure it would be wide. Reporters. Investigators. Quiet enemies waiting for the Grants to slip. All of them had been fed breadcrumbs for months. Clara once said I was too slow to rise. She didn't realize I was just building the foundation deeper than she could ever imagine. The thing about golden families? They're beautiful to look at from afar. But if you get too close, you realize it's just gold leaf over rust. And me? I was done pretending not to see it. The invitation came in the middle of a Wednesday. Subject line, formal family dinner, celebrate with us. Sent by Clara. Polished language. Sentences that looked like they'd been scrubbed through a PR team before she hit send. The kind of message where the font is just as pretentious as the people behind it. I read it twice. Then once more, slower. Celebrate with us was a funny phrase when it came from a woman who hadn't kissed me good morning in months. Who kept separate bank accounts, a separate social calendar, and, if I was reading her eyes correctly, a separate life altogether. The invitation wasn't random. It wasn't spontaneous. It was bait. Polite bait. The last line said, "No surprises. Be your best self." And that was the part that made me laugh. That meant they were planning something. The Grants never said anything without intention. Clara's wording, Charles's timing, Lorraine's RSVP delay, it was all part of the play. They wanted to put on a performance and needed me to show up and sit in the seat labeled punchline. I accepted instantly. No hesitation. I replied with, wouldn't miss it for the world. But they weren't the only ones preparing. 3 days before the dinner, I met up with Turner in a small Korean restaurant downtown. No suit, just jeans, a hoodie, and a look in his eyes like he already knew what I was going to say. Turner had spent the last 6 months embedding tracking code into the digital shadows the Grants left behind. Mason's texts, Clara's emails, Lorraine's server at her foundation, Charles's real estate deal history. Nothing was safe. Not when you knew where to look, and we did. See, the thing about power? It makes people lazy. They forget how exposed they are. They assume if they delete something, it's gone. If they say it behind a closed door, it's safe. But the world doesn't work like that anymore. The truth leaves trails. Digital ones. And I had every one of theirs cataloged, time-stamped, backed up in triplicate. My folder was titled The Truth About the Grant Family. It had taken me years. And now, the stage was set. 2 days before the dinner, I drove out to the edge of town, to an office park that looked abandoned. It wasn't. Hidden inside was a secure server Turner controlled. There, we uploaded everything. Password locked. Scheduled distribution. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. I stood there watching the progress bar tick from 82%, 93%, complete. And then I sent a message to 2 major reporters. Anonymous tip. Time-stamped release. Evidence attached. They'd get everything 10 minutes after dinner started. I wasn't playing games anymore. I was preparing a controlled demolition. Back at home, Clara floated through the condo like nothing had changed. She smiled more that week than she had in the past 3 months. Like the anticipation of watching me squirm at dinner made her giddy. She even bought me a new shirt. "Wear this Friday," she said, laying it gently on the bed. It was charcoal gray. Expensive. Tailored. I held it in my hands and nodded. "You want me to look sharp?" She gave me a smile that didn't quite touch her eyes. "You're part of the family. Look the part." That line sat with me. Look the part. That's what I'd been doing all along, hadn't I? Looking the part of the quiet, grateful husband. The outsider brought in and kept around for decoration. The man who smiled at the jokes, poured the wine, laughed when they needed someone to laugh. But this time, I wouldn't be the joke. This time, I'd be the mirror. On the day of the dinner, I shaved carefully, trimmed my beard just enough to look sharp but not too polished. I wore the shirt Clara picked. It fit like it was stitched by someone who thought image was everything. I buttoned it slowly, thoughtfully, and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was calm, but something behind my eyes had changed. I wasn't hiding anymore. At 7 p.m. sharp, we walked into the penthouse. The room glowed gold. The table was already set, the glasses aligned with military precision. Clara's parents stood near the fireplace, smiling for a photographer. Mason stood off to the side with a glass of bourbon in one hand and a wicked grin curling across his face. He saw me and leaned in to whisper something to Clara. She laughed lightly and touched his arm. Everyone was in on it. Everyone except me, or so they thought. We sat. The dinner began with pleasantries, with Lorraine complimenting Clara's dress and Charles bragging about a zoning approval for a new waterfront tower. I nodded, made small talk, passed the potatoes. They wanted to disarm me first, give me the illusion of belonging, soften the edges before the blade dropped. And then, right after the appetizers, Charles tapped his glass and grinned. "My dear family," he said, "tonight we celebrate more than just another quarter of dominance in our industries. Tonight, we celebrate family, the glue that holds everything together." And we thought, why not have a little fun while we're at it? I tilted my head slightly. The lights dimmed. A screen lowered from the ceiling. The room shifted. Eyes twinkled with anticipation. Clara's smile sharpened. Mason reached for his drink with glee. I kept still. Then it flashed. Failed son-in-law. Unemployed. Disappointment. Deadbeat. Reject. The laughter erupted, just like I expected. Mason nearly choked on his drink. Clara leaned in, her voice smooth. "Just a little joke, darling." Charles's voice boomed. "It's all in good fun, son." And that's when I stood. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my phone, and with one tap, began the end of the performance. They had written a script, but I brought the rewrite. I looked up. Joke's over. Then I said it. Just one word. Play. There was a sharp pause, not silence yet, just confusion. Laughter still lingered in the corners of the room like stale perfume, but the tone had shifted. A few eyes narrowed. A few more darted toward me, then to the screen behind me. I didn't flinch. Didn't explain. I said one word. Play. And the room obeyed. The slideshow of humiliation, the one Clara and her family had choreographed, disappeared. The screen turned black. Then white text appeared, bold and crisp against the dark background. "Welcome to the real Grant family." It hit the room like a dropped wine glass. Everyone froze. Forks paused midair. Chews were left unfinished. The opening clip played Mason's voice, unmistakable, playing over hidden phone footage. He was sitting at an upscale rooftop lounge, arms draped over the back of his chair like royalty. The camera angle was discreet, tilted just enough to catch the skyline in the background. So yeah, I've got insider numbers on the Willcroft zoning deal, he was saying, swirling his drink. Charles guarantees the permit's passing. We move quick. We double by Q2. One of his friends, unseen, laughed and said, "Isn't that illegal?" Mason just grinned. "Nah, not when you own the people writing the rules." Gasps fluttered across the table. Charles dropped his knife with a sharp clatter. Lorraine sat bolt upright. Clara shifted her eyes between the screen and me, trying to calculate how bad it was going to get. They had no idea. Not yet. The second video rolled. This time, the setting was softer, a spa room, muted lighting. Clara's voice came first. "I mean, look, he's sweet, but he's basically invisible." A second woman laughed, her friend. Maybe one of those surface-deep types who called everything iconic. Clara continued, completely unaware she was being recorded. "He's a good tax write-off. Quiet, loyal, boring. I can't have a real power couple life with him, but I can have balance. You know." Then the real gut punch. "Honestly, he's like a lamp. Fills the room, doesn't do much." Laughter again, this time from her side of the screen. "But not in the dining room. Not anymore." Charles stood up halfway. "Turn it off," he barked. "I don't know what kind of stunt this is, but I raised a single hand." The screen paused. "No one's turning anything off," I said, voice calm. "Even. It's not running from this room. It's streaming from a remote server, encrypted. Shut it down here, and it just keeps playing somewhere else. Try to block it, and it sends automatic backups to the Boston Globe and every boardroom Charles Grant ever stepped foot in." I watched Charles swallow that bitter truth like poison. Mason stood abruptly. "This is illegal," he said, voice cracking. "You're recording private conversations? That's entrapment." I nodded slowly. "Except when you're bragging about crimes in public spaces, or when consent's given by one party, or when the company you're bragging in front of is owned by me." Their faces morphed in slow waves. Shock, then disbelief, then panic. The third video began. A slideshow of documents, transaction records, fake charitable filings, off-the-books foundation expenses. Lorraine's name appeared in nearly every line item. The audio picked up her voice from a dinner party, diverted through the children's literacy wing. Nobody audits the kids. The screen faded momentarily, then came a voiceover from a female narrator, Turner's AI overlay, designed for maximum clarity. According to financial records, over $3.1 million was funneled through Lorraine Grant's education fund and redirected to shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. These corporations are registered to holding companies linked directly to Mason Grant's personal accounts. Lorraine stood now. She looked like someone had reached inside her chest and turned her heart cold. This is a hit job," she whispered. "No," I said. "This is evidence. Well-organized, well-documented evidence. Everything you ever thought was invisible just stepped into the light." Clara was pale. She hadn't spoken since her spa recording played. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, maybe considering an exit. But she didn't move. She couldn't. The next clip was from a phone call between Clara and Charles, just 2 weeks prior. I'd intercepted it from a mirrored device, something Turner planted through an unsecured router in their Martha's Vineyard estate. "Charles, we need to find a way to freeze him out. Get him to sign a revised prenup. If he doesn't play along, we pull the mental health card. Clara, I'm already laying the groundwork. He's been distant. I'll start planting that he's unstable. Quiet guys always make the best villains in court." That was it. The line that sucked the air out of the room. Villain in court. I looked directly at her then. Not with hate. Just recognition. "I never raised my voice at you," I said softly. "Never cursed at you. Never disrespected your family, even when you all treated me like a decorative ghost. And still, you plan to ruin me because I didn't entertain your dinner parties." Clara blinked rapidly, like she was trying to will this into a dream. But it was too late. The screen faded to black again. End of part 1. Stay tuned. There was silence. Not stunned silence. Shattered silence. The kind that sits in your ears like pressure before a storm. No one moved. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a slim black envelope. "This," I said, placing it at the center of the table, "contains affidavits from 3 former employees of Grant Holdings. Testimonies about harassment, illegal accounting, and intimidation. It's already been filed with regulators." I turned to Charles. "There's a reason 3 journalists were waiting outside when we arrived. You're going to have a press conference very soon, but it won't be the kind you're used to." Then to Lorraine. Your foundation's license is already under review. Expect a full audit within 72 hours. You'll want a good lawyer, not the one you keep for show. And finally, to Clara. I filed for divorce this morning. The documents are clean, final, and sealed with enough leverage that you won't challenge it unless you want your personal communications leaked to every board you sit on. Clara opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her hands were trembling. I took a deep breath, looked around. Let this be the moment you remember that even quiet men have limits. You tried to erase me, redefine me, humiliate me. I tucked the envelope back under my arm. But the truth, I smiled faintly. You were the ones performing, and now the world gets to watch. Then I stepped away from the table, walked slowly toward the wide oak double doors that led to the hallway. Behind me, no one followed. No one spoke. They just stared at the screen and at the man they thought was too harmless to matter. I've seen fear in people before. I've seen it in negotiations, in boardrooms, in quiet moments when someone realizes they're out of their depth. But I'd never seen it like this, not the way it crept into the corners of the Grant family dining room after that video ended. It was the kind of fear that doesn't scream or run. It just sits there, heavy and cold, pressing on the chest. Charles was still standing, hand on the table, knuckles white. For a man who built empires on intimidation, he suddenly looked very, very small. Lorraine had gone stiff, her posture perfect as always, but her jaw was clenched tight enough to crack a diamond. And Clara, she hadn't moved since the word divorce left my mouth. Her expression was stuck somewhere between disbelief and devastation, like a part of her couldn't compute the reality unfolding in front of her. You'll regret this, Clara finally said. It came out in a whisper, more fragile than threatening. I turned to her slowly. I think, I said, you already do. She blinked at that. I could see the war happening behind her eyes. The calculations. The scramble. Clara was smart, manipulative, yes, but not stupid. She was raised to always have the upper hand. Now she was standing in a room where every card had been played, and none of them were hers. Charles tried to pull himself together. He straightened his jacket, glanced around like he was still in charge of something. This is extortion, he said. You've broken privacy laws, violated, what? Every principle of decency. I cut him off. Calmly, quietly. I've followed every federal and state regulation regarding the gathering and release of public interest information, I said. You're welcome to challenge it. But if you do, be prepared for discovery. Be prepared to sit under oath. Be prepared for subpoenas on the last 20 years of Grant Holdings' financial activity. His mouth opened, then closed again. Behind me, I felt movement. I turned slightly, one of the servers. A young man, maybe 24, clearing empty glasses near the bar. He caught my eye, gave the smallest nod, and kept working. That was Lucas, one of Turner's interns. Embedded 2 weeks ago, hired through the catering company. Quiet, competent, watching everything. I wasn't alone in this. And I think that's what unnerved them the most. They weren't just being exposed. They were being outmaneuvered. Clara had always said I was too nice to be dangerous. Her words. She once whispered them in bed after a gala, when I turned down the opportunity to humiliate one of Mason's exes in front of the press. You're sweet, she said. Not built for war. She never realized I didn't avoid war because I was afraid of it. I avoided it because I wanted to win. And winning requires patience. Now, the cracks were showing. Charles moved to the wall and slammed a button, trying to bring up the control panel for the screen. Nothing responded. Lorraine pulled out her phone, started dialing someone, her lawyer, maybe. But the signal jam Turner's setup was still active. They were trapped in a perfectly soundproof, signal-blocked room. No noise in, no noise out. They called it a family dinner. I called it a reckoning. You've made your point, Mason said finally, voice shaky. I looked at him. He looked nothing like the smug, sneering man who once joked that I had the spine of a fern. His hair was messy now, collar slightly crooked. His hands, once steady with bourbon and bravado, now trembled faintly at his sides. I haven't made anything yet, I said. This wasn't performance art, Mason. This was just the start. The hard drives are in federal hands now. The SEC is reviewing the Wilcroft case. The City Ethics Board has your bribery confession. And the Boston Globe has a press package ready to publish at midnight. He staggered back a step. You think this makes you better than us? Lorraine hissed. No, I said. It just makes me done pretending you were ever better than me. She stood up, spine straight as a steel beam. We gave you everything. You gave me humiliation, I said. You gave me reminders that I wasn't enough for your daughter. that my presence at your table was charity, that I should be grateful for scraps of your approval. I took a slow breath, let the words hang. But what you didn't realize, I continued, was that your arrogance was the blueprint. You taught me exactly where your weaknesses were, because you were proud of them. You laughed too loudly, bragged too openly, mocked too confidently. You showed me everything I needed to see. And now here we are. Clara finally stood. Her voice cracked as she said, "You really hate me." That stopped me for a second. I turned toward her fully, met her eyes. And I didn't feel hate. I felt something else, colder, older, like dust on a locked door. "No," I said. "I don't hate you. That would require me to still care." She flinched like I'd slapped her. I wanted to feel something about that, but I didn't. The silence returned, stretching long across the room. Then Charles spoke again, his voice lower now, like he was trying to reach some diplomatic middle ground. "What do you want?" I smiled, not kindly. "Nothing," I said. "Not a cent. Not a house. Not your daughter. This isn't blackmail. This is exposure. The truth doesn't ask for favors. It just demands to be seen." He nodded slowly, as if he was only now understanding that there wasn't a negotiation left to make. I started walking toward the door again, then paused. "Oh, by the way," I said, turning around, "the footage you watched tonight? That was only part one." Charles stiffened. "There's more?" Mason asked. I shrugged. "Let's just say if I were you, I'd start making apologies while they're still optional." I walked to the door, this time uninterrupted. Lucas stepped aside with the tray in his hands and murmured, "They never saw it coming." "No," I replied, pulling open the heavy wooden door. "They never thought I was watching." And with that, I stepped into the hallway, leaving the Golden family to crack, shatter, and fall apart from within. Silence is funny. Most people think it's peaceful, calming, serene. But that kind of silence, the one you choose, only exists in yoga classes and countryside cottages. What happened after I walked out of that dining room was the other kind of silence. The kind that follows a detonation. The kind that hums low and sharp and makes your skin crawl. I didn't go far. Just to the elevator bay, where marble floors met glass walls and the view stretched across the Boston skyline. I stood there for a minute, letting the cold city lights ground me. Behind the thick doors, I knew they were still frozen, watching each other, questioning everything. Because that's what happens when people are exposed. They stop being a team. They start being suspects. I heard nothing from them for about 2 minutes. Then came the first raised voice. Charles, barking orders like he still owned the room. Lorraine yelling for someone to call their PR firm. Mason cursing loud and sloppy, blaming Clara. And Clara? She was quiet, which told me she was thinking, calculating. Unlike the rest of them, she wasn't a screamer. She weaponized silence better than anyone. But I'd already taken her favorite tool and turned it against her. The elevator opened. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. Just before the doors closed, I saw the reflection in the polished panel, my own face. Still calm, still composed. But behind my eyes, there was something new, something final. The elevator descended slowly, floor by floor. I could have taken the express, but I didn't. I wanted those extra seconds. The quiet between storms. When the doors opened at the ground level, the scene had already started shifting. The lobby was no longer just polished stone and designer lighting. It was now a stage. 2 black SUVs were parked at the curb. One of them carried agents from the State Ethics Commission. I recognized their badges. Turner had given them everything they needed, packaged with a bow. A couple of journalists from the Boston Ledger were already standing by the security desk. They didn't see me. Not yet. That was fine. I walked out like any other man leaving a late dinner. No security. No dramatics. No handcuffs on me. I was never the one on trial. But the cracks were widening above me. I could feel it. I slipped into a black car parked across the street. Lucas was already in the driver's. Mason had turned over a chair. Charles was pacing with a phone in one hand, shouting at someone who clearly wasn't giving him the answer he wanted. Lorraine sat like a statue, stiff and pale, as if decades of rehearsed elegance had finally collapsed under the weight of reality. And Clara. She was sitting at the end of the table, her hands folded in front of her, staring down at the untouched wine glass. Her shoulders didn't move. Her lips were pursed, not trembling, still composed. But her eyes, they were the only thing that betrayed her. Wide, red-rimmed, not from tears, from being outplayed. Turner's voice buzzed through the car's speaker system. Press releases are dropping now. Channel 6 just ran the Wilcroft tape. Grant Holdings stock is down 7 points and falling. I nodded once. Keep the feed running, I said. Record everything. Lucas pulled out onto the street, and I didn't look back. Because this wasn't about watching them fall. This wasn't about basking in their ruin. It was about clarity. See, people always ask me why I stayed quiet for so long. Why I let them mock me, diminish me, treat me like an accessory to their world instead of a man with a world of his own. And the truth was, I didn't just stay quiet to survive. I stayed quiet to build, to prepare, to see who they really were when they thought I wasn't watching. The next morning, the fallout began in full. Front pages, online headlines, social media storms. Boston elite exposed, the Grant family scandal. Insider trading, embezzlement, and betrayal inside the collapse of a dynasty. Charles's company was already being audited by noon. Lorraine's foundation had its nonprofit status frozen pending investigation. Mason's private accounts were locked for suspicious offshore activity. Every board Clara sat on was reevaluating her position in light of new information. They scrambled, released statements, hired new lawyers, blamed old staff, tried to plug the dam with vanity and influence. But the cracks were too deep. By the end of the day, Clara's face was on every screen. Not because she was beautiful, but because she had become the symbol of the lie. And still, she didn't reach out. Not yet. She waited 2 days. I was in my new apartment by then, smaller, simpler, but mine. No white marble. No wine cellar. Just a second-floor walk-up with creaky floors and a decent view of the harbor. It was the first place I'd lived in years that actually felt like home. That night, my phone buzzed. Clara. One message. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long time. She wasn't apologizing. Not yet. She was just opening a door, hoping I'd be standing on the other side. Maybe hoping I'd still be the man who once bent over backwards to keep the peace. The man who excused her cruelty in the name of love. The man who laughed when she laughed, even if the joke was at my expense. But that man? He didn't live here anymore. I put the phone face down. Didn't reply. Outside, the rain began to fall. Gentle, cleansing. I stood by the window, watching the droplets run down the glass like silent punctuation marks on a story that was finally ending. Not with a bang, not with a scream, just with the sound of shattering silence. They say every empire collapses from the inside long before the world sees the rubble. That's exactly what was happening to the Grants, slowly, then all at once. But before the ash settled, I had one final piece to place. One last nail to drive into the coffin of their illusion. I wasn't done yet. I gave them space, not out of mercy, but precision. Let them flail. Let them try to patch the sinking ship with statements and staged interviews. Charles released a pre-recorded video, calling the expose a deeply edited smear campaign orchestrated by a disgruntled ex-employee. Mason posted an Instagram story flexing at a gym, as if biceps could undo a felony. Lorraine went silent, probably too busy deleting years of fake donation receipts and burning whatever bridges her foundation was built on. And Clara? Clara disappeared from public view completely, but not from my radar. I was watching, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see how she moved now that the walls had closed in. Now that she couldn't weaponize charm or pedigree. She didn't message me again after that first night. Didn't beg. Didn't call. And I knew why. Because she thought there was still a card left to play. So I decided to flip the table. The following Thursday, I walked into my attorney's office with a file. A thin envelope. Slim enough to look unimportant. Inside were 3 key things. A copy of our original prenup with her edits scratched in red ink. Voice transcripts of her planning to feign instability on my part to gain assets. And the finalized divorce papers with every clause stacked in my favor. My attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Ruth Delgado, scanned it all in silence. Then she looked up at me with the smallest grin. She's not going to fight this, Ruth said. She'll know it's over the moment she reads the last line, I replied. Because the last line of the filing wasn't just a legal statement. It was a declaration. I was relinquishing everything. The condo, the art, the joint holdings. Except one thing, my name. You see, Clara had started branding herself recently. Clara Grant Hale. It sounded powerful, didn't it? The kind of name you put on a TEDx poster or a luxury skincare line. She used my surname when it suited her, at gala events, press releases, whenever she needed to soften the Grant sharpness with something more human. But not anymore. I wasn't letting her keep my name. Not after she tried to erase me from hers in every way that mattered. That clause alone would shatter the brand she'd tried to build behind my back. The next morning, I had the papers delivered. No warning, just a knock at her temporary apartment downtown. Turner's team made sure it arrived during a live stream interview with a journalist who still thought she had something worth hearing. Her face dropped mid-sentence. The interviewer asked if everything was all right. She smiled tightly and ended the stream early. I didn't need to see the footage to know. I got the text 15 minutes later. Clara, I hope you're proud of this. Clara, this will haunt you too, you know. Clara, is this revenge or closure? I didn't reply, because it wasn't either. It was truth, pure and simple. But she wasn't the only one I had unfinished business with. I called Charles myself. Direct line. It rang twice before his assistant picked up, clearly flustered. He's unavailable. Tell him this won't wait, I said. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. Charles Grant, and all his wounded pride. What the hell do you want? He snapped. No hello. I want to give you a gift, I said. He laughed. Bitter. Are you serious? Deadly. I could hear him breathing, that slow, arrogant inhale of a man still trying to regain ground. I'm not interested in handouts, he muttered. It's not a handout, I said. It's a warning. Silence. Then, go on. I know about the Cayman accounts. The blind trusts. The Venezuelan land deals Mason registered under a shell company tied to your assistant's maiden name. More silence. And I know what you told Clara, I continued. About me. About setting me up as unstable. About framing me to protect your name. You can't prove. Already did. And I've sent it to the IRS and Interpol. But I left one thing out. That caught him. You what? I left the Boston waterfront project off the file, I said calmly. For now. He was quiet. That's leverage, he said finally, voice softer now. Calculated. Desperate. No, I replied. That's mercy. He exhaled like he'd been punched in the ribs. Why? Because I'm not like you, I said. Because you mistook my silence for weakness. But it was restraint. And you don't deserve the full storm I could bring. A beat passed. Then he said something I didn't expect. You were never meant to be the enemy. I didn't laugh. You made me the enemy the moment you framed my love as a liability, I said. And now you can live with what you built. I hung up. That was the last time I ever spoke to Charles Grant. By the end of the week, the SEC had frozen their Boston project. Lorraine's foundation site had been taken down. Mason was served a formal inquiry notice from the Department of Justice. Clara was dropped from 2 of her corporate boards. And me? I sat in a small cafe, 2 blocks from my new office, sipping black coffee with no sugar. A place where no one knew my face. Where no one whispered behind linen napkins. Where I was just a man with a quiet story and a louder piece. Because sometimes, the last nail in someone's coffin isn't the loudest blow. Sometimes, it's the one you drive in with a whisper. And walk away. You'd think watching a dynasty fall would feel like fireworks, loud, bright, a final spectacle of sound and fury. But it didn't. Not for me. Watching the Grants unravel felt more like standing in the middle of a quiet forest, hearing a rotted tree snap under its own weight. It was peaceful. I watched it from a distance. I didn't need front row seats. The headlines did the work for me. The world didn't just see cracks, they saw collapse. SEC confirms investigation into Grant Holdings. Lorraine Grant's foundation under fire for fraudulent donations. Mason Grant tied to offshore accounts, Justice Department responds. Socialite Clara Grant Hale served divorce papers live on stream. Each headline was a brick removed from their image. By the time the weekend hit, the dam broke. I was in my office, leaning back in a leather chair that finally felt earned, sipping a quiet espresso when my phone buzzed. Turner's voice came through, steady as always. They're trying to cut deals, he said. Of course they are, I muttered. Charles wants to meet. I paused. Where? His lawyer says he'll come alone. No press. No cameras. Just dignity. The irony almost made me laugh. Charles Grant asking for dignity now was like a butcher asking to borrow white gloves. But I agreed. Not for him. For me. We met in a quiet conference room inside the Ritz, the same place they once held a gala Clara refused to let me attend. Charles walked in wearing a gray suit that hung looser than usual. He looked smaller. His pride wasn't gone, but it was cracked. He sat down across from me without a word, placed his phone on the table face down, and folded his hands like a man about to pray. I'm not going to apologize, he said. Didn't expect you to. But I will say this, he added. You played it better than I thought you could. I tilted my head slightly. That was always the problem, Charles. You never thought I could. He nodded once. No denial. Just the quiet acceptance of a man staring at the blueprint of his own downfall. I taught Clara to choose image over integrity, he admitted. Taught Mason to smile while lying. Told Lorraine to polish every scandal until it sparkled like charity. You married into the show, and I blamed you when you didn't play along. I let the silence stretch. I just thought I was protecting my family, he added, almost to himself. You weren't, I said. You were preserving a lie. And now you're paying for it. Charles looked down, then back up. I'll lose everything, he said. You know that, right? You already did. He nodded again. Then he stood, slowly, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a silver keycard. This was Clara's idea, he said. A second property. Backup estate. Vermont. I doubt she told you about it. She didn't. He placed it on the table between us. You own it now. She transferred the title to your joint trust 3 months ago, probably forgot. Don't worry, I'm not coming after it. Just figured you should know what you're walking away with. I stared at the keycard for a moment. I didn't touch it. I'm not here for souvenirs. He exhaled deeply. I figured. I stood up. Charles remained seated, his hands still folded like he needed something to hold on to. I gave him one last look. Not out of sympathy. Not even pity. Just closure. You were never the king, I said quietly. You were just the curtain. And then I walked away. By the time I exited the Ritz, the sun was setting over Boston. Soft gold spilled across the streets, warming the pavement, casting long shadows from the buildings above. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, like a man no longer being chased. When I turned the corner, a figure was waiting by my car. Clara. She wasn't wearing designer. Just jeans and a sweater. Her hair tied back, no makeup. For the first time in years, she looked like a person instead of a portrait. When she saw me, her shoulders dropped, like she wasn't sure how to stand anymore. You read the papers? I asked. I lived them, she said. We stood there, just the two of us, with a wall of silence between us heavier than any skyscraper her family had ever built. I didn't come to beg, she said. Good. She swallowed hard. I wanted to look you in the eyes and say, I was wrong. I waited. I thought you were beneath us. That I was marrying someone who would never understand this world. I didn't realize you saw through it. That you knew what it really was before I did. Maybe I always knew, I said. But I loved you anyway. Her eyes flickered. Moisture lined the edges. She blinked it back. And now I love myself more. She nodded. It broke something in her, I could tell. But she didn't collapse. Didn't plead. And I respected her for that. You'll move on, she said. You'll become something bigger than this. I already am. I opened the car door. She didn't follow. I won't message you again, she said behind me. I know. Then she said the thing I think she'd wanted to say for months. Maybe years. I never saw you. And I gave her the final truth in return. No. But I did. Then I got into the car, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. No looking back. No soundtrack. No second guessing. Because when you've burned down a lie, you don't stand around admiring the ashes. You walk into the clean air. And breathe. 1 year. That's how long it's been since I walked out of the penthouse and left the Grant family staring at the wreckage of their perfect illusion. A full year since Clara dropped her wine glass and Charles lost his grip on a room for the first time in his life. Since Mason's smirk disappeared and Lorraine's empire of false generosity began to rot from the inside out. It's strange how fast the world moves when the truth finally steps into the light. People often ask me what happened afterward, how I rebuilt, where I went, if I ever looked back. The truth is, I didn't need to rebuild. Because I was never broken. Just buried. There's a difference. After the dust settled, I disappeared for a while. Not to hide, but to rest. I moved north to Vermont for a few months, to the estate Clara didn't know she'd accidentally signed over to our joint trust. It was quiet, surrounded by trees and the kind of silence that doesn't bite, the kind that heals. No reporters, no headlines. Just me, my breath, and a laptop. And a story. I hadn't planned to write it. But one morning, I sat by the fireplace, staring at the bare walls, and the words started pouring out of me like water through a cracked dam. I wrote everything. The jokes, the betrayals, the silence, the strength I had to find in the shadows. It wasn't anger that drove the pages. It was clarity. I called the book The Man They Tried to Erase. Not out of spite, but truth. Because for years, that's what they tried to do. Rewrite me into something smaller. Easier to dismiss. something they could laugh at without consequence. But the more they tried to erase me, the more permanent I became. I finished the manuscript in 4 weeks. Turner read it first. He called me at 3 a.m. after finishing it in one sitting. "You don't need revenge," he said. "You've already outlived the lie." We published it under my name, full, unedited, unfiltered. No ghostwriters. No corporate polish. Just my voice. It debuted modestly. But something happened. People began to read it, not just because it was juicy, but because they saw themselves in it. People who had been minimized, undervalued, mocked for being quiet, for not shining in the ways others expected. People who were erased, not because they were weak, but because they made the powerful uncomfortable. The book went viral. Bookstores sold out in days. Book clubs dissected it. Therapists recommended it. And before long, a publisher reached out for a second printing. Then a third. Then the tour invites came. Podcasts, panels, speaking engagements. Not because I was chasing fame, but because people were hungry for proof that dignity could survive destruction. And me? I didn't become a celebrity. I became a mirror. And people were finally ready to look. That's when I launched my firm, Reclaim Capital, a venture capital company dedicated to underdogs, the overlooked, underestimated, undervalued. People like I used to be. Artists, engineers, teachers, single parents, janitors, visionaries too quiet to be seen by loud investors. I didn't just invest in their ideas. I invested in their fire. Our first year, we funded 22 startups. 15 became profitable. 3 landed international licensing deals. 1 IPO'd last month. That one? Started by a dishwasher named Elijah who built a water purification system from scrap metal in his garage. People laughed at him. Until I didn't. Reclaim Capital is more than a company. It's a movement. It's proof that you don't need a last name etched into granite or a penthouse on Beacon Street to be powerful. You just need a chance. And I became the man who gave those chances. Funny, isn't it? The very family that tried to write me out of their story ended up making me the author of my own. As for Clara, she never messaged again after that night on the curb. No lawsuits. No interviews. She disappeared from the public eye, retreated into quiet living. I heard whispers she moved to Colorado, started volunteering at a local shelter, went back to school for counseling. Maybe she's finding herself. Or maybe she's hiding from what she saw that night, not in the footage, but in me. In the man she didn't recognize anymore. Charles was indicted last fall. Fraud, bribery, conspiracy. Mason made a deal. Testified. Got a lighter sentence. Lorraine's foundation was permanently shut down. A former employee took over its mission, rebuilt it under a new name, and this time, the money actually went to children who needed it. Every empire has its reckoning, but not every survivor becomes stronger from it. I did, and I'll never apologize for that. Today, I stood in front of a theater packed with 2,000 people. I was the keynote speaker at a conference on resilience and reinvention. I wore a plain black suit. No designer label. Just confidence. The crowd stood when I walked out. Not for fame. Not for flash. But for truth. And when the lights dimmed, and I stepped to the podium, I said the first words that came to my heart. There was a time I thought silence was the safest place to live. That if I just stayed quiet, if I smiled and swallowed enough insults, I'd eventually earn their respect. But I learned something. Silence isn't safety. It's strategy. And eventually, strategy becomes strength. They leaned in. Because the people who tried to erase you, they don't know that shadows are where legends are born. Thunderous applause. Not for revenge, but for rebirth. Afterward, a young man approached me backstage. I added, placing a hand on his shoulder, "They can't erase what's written in fire." Now, I sit here in my office, watching the sun dip below the city skyline. My phone buzzes with messages, offers, invitations, but I let them sit, because I don't need the noise. I have peace now, and that's the loudest victory of all. Before I lock up, I open my private files. One folder still remains. The original. The truth about the Grant family. Every recording. Every email. Every clipped phrase. I hover over it for a moment, and then I delete it. Not because I've forgotten, but because I've forgiven myself. Clara was right about one thing, long ago. I wasn't built for the spotlight. I was built to outlast it. They tried to erase me, but all they did was underline me. And now? Now, I write my own story. One word at a time.